On an October afternoon in 1944, a black staff car waited outside a quiet house in southern Germany. Inside, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel put on his coat for the last time. Two generals had come from Berlin with a message from Adolf Hitler. Rommel would never return from the drive they were about to take. The regime he had served for years now saw him as a possible traitor. All that remained was his final choice: a public show trial before the People's Court, or a silent death, sold to the nation as a hero's funeral. This was Rommel's last stand, not in the desert, not on the beaches of Normandy, but in a small German town, against the system he had helped to build. You're watching Last Stand history. We tell cinematic, story-driven accounts of real battles and commanders. Today, we follow the final months of Erwin Rommel, from Hitler's favorite general to a man the regime no longer trusted, and we ask a simple question. Why did Rommel finally turn against Hitler in 1944? To understand his last stand, we need to know who Rommel was. He was not a traditional Prussian aristocrat. He came from a middle-class family in southern Germany. In the First World War, he earned a reputation for bold infantry attacks. He wrote a book on tactics that impressed younger officers. When the Second World War began, Rommel commanded the 7th Panzer Division in France. His fast, aggressive maneuvers earned him the nickname Ghost Division. Later, in North Africa, he led the Afrika Korps. British and American reporters called him the Desert Fox, a clever, daring opponent who moved armored forces like a fencer's blade. Nazi propaganda loved this image. Posters and newsreels turned Rommel into a heroic symbol. Hitler admired him. Rommel was invited to brief the dictator directly. For a time, their relationship looked close. But that closeness would matter in 1944, when Rommel no longer agreed with what Hitler demanded. By late 1943, the Desert War was over. Rommel had been withdrawn from Africa due to illness and exhaustion. Hitler now needed him in the West. The Allies were clearly preparing to invade occupied France. German defenses along the Atlantic coast were a mix of strong and weak points. In late 1943, Rommel was given command of Army Group B. He was responsible for defending a large stretch of the French coastline. Officially, he served under Field Marshal von Rundstedt, the overall commander in the West. Rommel toured the Atlantic Wall. He saw problems everywhere: bunkers incomplete, troops poorly trained, defenses too thinly spread. He believed that with Allied air superiority, any enemy landing that broke into open country would become unstoppable. So he argued for a different plan. He wanted to crush the invasion on the beaches, throw everything at the first few hours. To do that, he pushed for more mines, more obstacles, and armored units held close to the coast. Other generals disagreed. They wanted to keep tanks further inland to counterattack once the Allies landed. Hitler wavered between these views. The result, as so often in 1944, was a compromise that satisfied no one. As 1944 began, Rommel's view of the war darkened. He knew Germany was being outproduced by the Allies. He saw Allied air power destroying rail lines and columns in daylight. Privately, he told his staff the war could not be won by force of arms, at least not against the Western powers. He also became more critical of Hitler's orders. In North Africa, he had already ignored some commands to stand fast. Now in France, he saw new directives that demanded no retreat, even if the situation was hopeless. Rommel thought those orders were suicidal. They would lead only to destroy divisions and burn cities. He began to write memoranda, careful reports that described the real situation in the West. He urged that Germany seek a political solution with Britain and the United States. This was not open rebellion. Rommel still wore the uniform of a field marshal. He still directed German forces in combat. But step by step, his loyalty shifted from Hitler personally to what he saw as the survival of Germany itself. That tension would define his last months. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy. Rommel was not at his headquarters when the invasion began. He had gone home briefly to see his family and lobby for more authority in Berlin. By the time he returned, the beaches were lost. The battle had moved inland into the hedgerows. Rommel tried to contain the Allied bridgehead, but Allied air power and artillery made every movement costly. He again recommended a political solution. He believed the Western Allies should be separated from the Soviet Union. Hitler refused. On July 17, 1944, Rommel's staff car was attacked by Allied aircraft near the front. The car crashed. Rommel was thrown out and badly injured. He suffered head wounds and was taken out of command to recover. For a time, his war seemed to be over. 3 days later, another drama unfolded in Berlin, one that would drag Rommel's name into a very different kind of battle. On the 20th of July, 1944, officers inside the German army tried to kill Hitler with a bomb at his headquarters in East Prussia. The explosion wounded many, but Hitler survived. The coup attempt collapsed within hours. The regime struck back with brutal speed. Thousands were arrested. Many were tortured. Show trials were staged before the People's Court. Several of the officers who had served under Rommel in the West were involved in the resistance. Most notably, his chief of staff, General Hans Speidel. What did Rommel know? Historians still debate this. There is evidence that Rommel knew some officers wanted to remove Hitler from power. Some later accounts suggest he supported the idea of arresting Hitler, but not killing him. What is clear is that, under interrogation, several conspirators mentioned Rommel's name. They claimed he was politically unreliable or potentially sympathetic to a change in leadership. For Hitler and his circle, that was enough. The myth of the loyal desert fox now looked dangerous. If a national hero turned against the regime, other officers might follow. They decided Rommel had to be removed, but they wanted to avoid a public scandal. So they prepared a different kind of execution, one wrapped in honor and ceremony, instead of a noose. On 14th October 1944, 2 senior officers arrived at Rommel's home in Herrlingen. They were General Wilhelm Burgdorf and General Ernst Meisel. They spoke with Rommel privately for some time. No full transcript of that conversation survives, but we know the outlines from later accounts by his family and staff. Rommel was told that he had been accused of treason. He could choose to face the People's Court in Berlin, a show trial that almost certainly meant hanging, and likely punishment for his family. Or he could take his own life quietly. If he chose suicide, he was promised that his family would be protected. He would receive a state funeral. The public would be told he died from his earlier wounds in France. For Rommel, this was the final trap. There was no option that allowed him to clear his name in public. After speaking with his wife and son, he made his decision. He put on his field marshal's uniform, walked out to the waiting car. On a quiet road outside the town, the car stopped. Rommel took a cyanide capsule provided by the officers. He died within minutes. Later that day, German radio announced that Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had succumbed to his war injuries. The truth was buried with him. So why did Rommel finally turn against Hitler? The answer is not a single dramatic moment. It is a chain of realizations in 1943 and 1944. He saw that the war in the West could not be won. He saw that Hitler's orders to fight to the last man would destroy both the army and the country. He tried to push for realistic defenses in Normandy. He wrote memoranda calling for a political solution with the Western Allies. He resisted some of the harshest orders, including policies that would have left French cities in ruins. All of this made him unreliable in the eyes of the regime, especially after the July 20th plot. Rommel was no simple hero. For years he had served a dictatorship. He had benefited from Nazi propaganda, and he did not openly break with Hitler until very late. But in his final months, he reached a line he would not cross. He would not support a war he believed was lost, and he would not lend his name to the total destruction of Germany. That quiet resistance cost him his life. In the end, Rommel's last stand was not on a battlefield. It was the decision to turn, however late, against the man who had once been his greatest patron. If you found this story useful for understanding the reality behind the Rommel legend, there is another last stand you should see next. Our next episode dives into a front-line unit that fought until it was completely surrounded. Subscribe to Last Stand History and join us for more cinematic stories of desperate battles, one last stand at a time.